for joining me on the Everything and Anything and a Big Gay podcast. Today is July 29th, and this is your daily LGBTQ plus news. I'm your host, Zach Randles-Friedman, and we've got a lot to get through. A legislative fight that actually went our way, a family put through hell for nothing, a congresswoman who brought props to a hearing, and a couple of genuine buried wins in this rough week. So let's get into it, starting with Boebert's trans military ban fails. So we're starting with a win because we don't get many of those lately. So let's sit in this one for just 1 second. Lauren Boebert tried to write the trans military ban directly into a federal law, not through an executive order, not through a policy memo, through an actual amendment to next year's defense spending bill. The language was blunt. It claimed trans people, quote, cannot satisfy the rigorous standards necessary for military service. Every single House Democrat voted against it, and this is the part that matters. The House Republicans joined them. The final vote was 2-12 to 2-17. It failed. Think about what that means right now. Republicans control the House, they control the Senate, they control the White House, the full trifecta, and they still couldn't get this one through. That's not a fluke, and that's not nothing. It means there's a ceiling on how far some of these attacks can go, even in this political environment and even with everything stacked in their favor. Somebody in that chamber still had to answer to their conscience or their district or both. Either way, the ban stayed out of law, at least it did today. Now we go to Pete Buttigieg and a reckless investigation. So to follow up with the story I did earlier today, something that happened that was so infuriating. Pete Buttigieg was separated from his young twins for a full 24 hours after a woman filed a child abuse accusation against him. Officials are now facing serious backlash over how this was handled. Critics describe the accuser as unstable and say the investigators move forward with questioning young children anyway, without adequate care for what that does to a family. Buttigieg was not charged with anything. Nothing was substantiated. And what actually happened is that a gay father lost a full day with his kids, and his children were pulled into an investigation built on a claim that fell apart. This is the kind of story that would get buried if it happened to anyone else. It's not going to get buried here because it shouldn't be. When the system moves this fast against a queer parent on a claim this thin, that's worth sitting with. I'll bring you more updates as we get more details on this Pete Buttigieg story and his children. Next, Nancy Mace House hearing theater. So as a follow-up to my story earlier this week, at a House hearing this week, Nancy Mace followed up with a printed photographs of drag queens from a reality competition show. She held them up and argued that drag content would lead to kids being sexually assaulted. This wasn't a hearing about drag. Nobody asked her to bring this. She inserted herself as a prop. For a moment, she clearly wanted on camera. One of the performers she named responded on social media with a simple question: can I sue? We'll say what we always say about this kind of thing. It is not really about protecting anyone. It's a stunt dressed up as a concern aimed at people who did nothing but simply exist publicly and do their jobs. She is a witch. Our next story is a hate crime and real consequences. So the next story is pretty heavy, but it really does matter. A man has been sentenced to 7 years in prison for shooting and paralyzing his neighbor in a targeted homophobic attack. This didn't come out of nowhere. In the weeks leading up to the shooting, he and his girlfriend harassed the victim relentlessly, posting signs in their windows facing his house with slurs on them, smearing feces on his property, and weeks of escalation, and then a gun. The victim survived. He'll live with the physical consequences of that night for the rest of his life. What we can tell you today is that his attacker is now living with the legal consequences too. 7 years of on the record for a crime that was never in question about its motive. Accountability doesn't undo harm, but it's not nothing either. I mean, could you imagine having a neighbor that harasses you and does these things? I feel so horrible for this person. I'm happy to hear that guy went to jail, especially for shooting him. Crazy. Next, the administration goes after a school district. Here's the one that should make your blood boil a little bit. A family found out that their child had been given a different name and pronouns at school, and they only found out because the school accidentally sent them an email revealing it. They sued the district. Now, instead of this staying as a local private matter about one family and one school, the federal government is threatening the entire district over its trans-inclusive policies. But let's be honest about what's happening here. The administration talks endlessly about parental rights, parents knowing what's happening with their kids, parents having a say, and parents being respected, right up until the parents in question are the ones supporting their trans or questioning kid. Then suddenly the concern about parental rights disappears, and that's what's left in an attack on the school and the kid caught in the middle. Next, Pennsylvania ends a bad law. Now for some real, tangible good news. Pennsylvania has officially ended enhanced criminal penalties that specifically targeted people living with HIV. For years, laws like this one did not do what their supporters claimed. They didn't prevent transmission. They didn't protect anyone. What they did was punish people simply for their HIV status and discourage people from being tested in the first place, because a diagnosis could turn into a criminal liability. Pennsylvania just became one less state doing that. This is a public health policy catching up to a public health science decades late, but it's finally here. If you've been waiting for a state to actually undo one of these laws instead of just talking about it, Pennsylvania is that state. And a little bit of joy to close, because we don't want to leave you in the heaviness of this week. Let's end with something lighter. Six Flags Magic Mountain in Southern California is gearing up for its annual Out on the Mountain night, a full evening of the park going all in for our community. Roller coasters, drag performances, music, a whole crowd of us taking over a theme park for one night. After everything we just covered, a night like that isn't frivolous. It's necessary. So go find your people and have fun, because you have earned it. And they do this every year at Disney World in Florida as well in the beginning of June. I believe there were some issues with it this year, but I still think it went on. It's called Gay Days at Disney, unofficial from Disney, but if you haven't been, check it out next June. So that's your news today. A band defeated in a chamber that's stacked against us. A family put through hell over nothing. A bad law finally gone in Pennsylvania. And a roller coaster waiting for you this weekend if you need it. If this show means something to you, hit follow wherever you're listening. Also, leave a rating and review and send today's episode to somebody who needs to hear it. I'll be back tomorrow with more LGBTQ+ news. Thank you for listening.